Sounds good.
Yep. Change my views. What does that mean?
Yes.
Oh, it's 5 after. That's perfect.
Can't think of Confucius without my favorite Confucius quote. If we don't change our direction,
Oh, that's
we're
nasty.
going to wind
That's
up where
from
we're
yesterday.
going.
That is so true. That is so true.
I like that.
Gosh, don't we need that wisdom now?
Oh, absolutely. We certainly do.
It's just like we're careening forward in the worst possible direction.
Sounds good. Good morning.
That was a bit of a challenge.
Yes, indeed.
Driving around.
Yeah.
Oh,
I wasn't paying attention.
Morning.
What's going on in the upper lot? Any idea?
Yeah.
Oh, it's the kermesse.
The what?
The kermesse, the Spanish fundraiser.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's a big deal.
Yeah, I'm sure. I was gonna turn in. I thought, whoops, I missed the memo.
No.
Yeah. Well, a lot of roads are blocked off if you're coming from Wheaton and you
Yes.
normally
Oh,
drive
yes, right.
past the college.
Yes,
So,
they are.
so that's probably delaying some people.
Can't get anywhere.
Yeah.
It delayed us.
Usually it's a train.
Yeah,
Today.
today it's work on the track, which is
And then
worse.
trying to find Kirk.
Well, I'd go out of my way to take the Taylor Street underpass, so I don't have to deal with the trains.
I live west and
Yeah.
north and Wheaton.
Yeah, me too.
All right, so since we are, we are streaming, and
Ah,
this is fun. There's just so much to get it that I was almost overwhelmed, so I had to really focus myself.
Whoa,
Yeah, now these actually sayings are from David,
okay.
so he did some of the data finding.
Did I miss it? Where's David?
They're in Knoxville, no,
Oh.
Nashville.
Oh.
Yeah.
Nashville.
I think they're just having fun.
Good for them.
So, exactly. I'm gonna turn off my screen because I can see my nose up on the top, so we're gonna keep that. It's a little distracting for me. Stop video. All right, making everything small. Yeah, so for the sake of formality, I am Joshua O'Shea. I'm an acolyte here. I've done a little bit of everything. I've done vestry. Professionally, I am a librarian and I love my work. And this is actually any of these people. So David asked if I could just jump in and present on Confucius because he was leaving. But anything that we've done would have been fun because I've wanted to look a little more at all of them anyhow, right? Probably that's why you're here too. So this is very limited, but I got stuff up on the screen that takes up the whole screen. So I'm gonna make this small. So I'm gonna listen for the door in case other people come in. Yeah, okay. Okay. Okay, here we go. So this is a recent picture. There was a major anniversary that just happened. Okay, so these are some of my sources. I like to do it a little backwards just so you get a sense of what I'm looking at. A couple of websites, asiasociety.org, Khan Academy, Confucius and the World He Created by Schumann. That is one of my biggest debt, or I'm very indebted to that book. I strongly recommend it. Another cool one is the Axel Age Teachers here by Dylan. And his argument is called the axial age or the turning age. Focuses on Confucius, Socrates, and Buddha. So and that's his argument. He's saying almost instead of 0 BC or BCE or whatever, it should actually be when these three guys were around. And I didn't, hey, let's look real quick. When is Abraham said to be around? Have happened? Or is this the prophets? So there may have been some major prophets around 500. So this is what I want from you. Be like, hey, that sounds like this. Or that's what I want from you. So here are a couple of quotes here that'll get us going. Drawing parallels between Confucian and Catholic integralist political philosophy, Schmitz emphasizes Yang's belief that the spiritual has primacy over the temporal and commands his desire to create a state that serves a creed. This was last month. American reactionaries looked to China for inspiration. There's in Commonwealth, I don't know if you're familiar with Commonwealth. It is, it's kind of like a political, social, religious periodical.
Oh, yeah, on a wheel.
But yeah. Well, I've heard it pronounced both ways.
Yeah.
It's a little, but no, this happened last month because there's a big resurgence in some people who kind of find themselves on more Christian, the right side of the aisle, looking at China and what they've been doing recently, especially with Confucianism, and we'll see why. Despite the ups and downs in its long history, Confucian law always reemerged and provided the foundation to fuse and absorb other elements which had found a way into Chinese civilization. It is like a growing tree. There are roots to its very ancient past, but the tree is still growing. This is also from last month. PRN Newswire. Understanding 1,000 years on Confucianism still influences people worldwide. I got one more. Yeah, hey, Meta. All the digital people without legs. VR technology that brought the global event that was Confucius' 2,573rd birthday to the metaverse on Wednesday. And this also was last month.
Wow.
The future of tradition. Globaltimes.co. So the birthday happened, and there's a bunch of people looking and saying, and realizing, oh, there's this kind of like re-emergence, or it was underground and now it's coming up again. All right, the man.
Here, Edna, take this place.
Yeah, we're right here, whichever. Got spots over on that side too. Again, about 500 in Khufu, which was the state of Lu, which is now Shandong in China. His goal is the philosophy that drove him was to be and to teach how to be a paragon of virtue. Oh, Diana.
We had a park
Oh,
know.
blocks away.
oh,
Yeah.
it's a party.
It is.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Good.
Yeah. A lot of things we're going to see there. He was a good human in that there's a lot of contradictions. There's a lot of flaws. There's a lot of deep integrity that he had for both the ideas he thought were important and for the people around him. And also, he really wanted to be a statesman. He really wanted to serve. He wanted to serve the people, but he was actually terrible at getting the government jobs that he wanted. Some of it was because it was a different political group that didn't particularly care for him who was affiliated. And sometimes, again, this is 500, okay? So any biographies are this is 500 BCE, right? So some of it's going to be here, like, how much do we exactly know? But other reasons are because he put his foot in his mouth, or he wasn't willing to play the game he had to because of his ideals. Do we admire that, or do we say, what good are your ideals if you can't actually get anything done? He wasn't terribly popular when he was alive. He had some students and he had a small school, but this was everybody knew about him because he wouldn't let people ignore him.
Mhm.
And because he was reaching back into the past. One of the things he said to us is, I transmit, I don't create. And he admired the Zhou dynasty, which was the previous dynasty, because maybe even two back, but very legalistic. We tend to have the term legalism as negative connotations, which I do myself,
Mhm.
but the idea is just very deontological, laws, prescriptions, detailed guidance. And he saw himself like as kind of like wanting to, am I a little slow here? Correct a lawless society with people without conviction. So there are a lot of different ways we could look at Confucianism. I'm going to kind of stick with filial piety.
Mhm.
This is one of his big mainstays. This term is very much attached to him. So we're going to focus on this. It's an attribute. It's a virtue. It's a discipline that influences and touches every single aspect of human interaction. If we'd ask, we're gonna look at this later, but if we're gonna ask, well, if you divide them up into politics, economics, sociology, psychology, religion, spirituality, you could make a good argument that even if you didn't talk about one of those things specifically, you can use filial piety to come back to get the ideas about maybe what he would have said if he was asked about a thing. There's a lot of ancestral veneration. So one of his big changes, again, all these are arguments and we can break them down because again, his ideas developed, there's a lot of writing, but also a lot of bickering and people didn't keep his, so, but an overgeneralization is he wanted to change from ancestral veneration focus to the moral imperative. Sounds like Locke, John Locke, right? The moral imperative. So I may have one of his quotes written on here about spirituality, but as somebody asked him, what do we do about the gods? And he says, if you don't know how to interact with other humans, why are you even thinking about the gods? And also an ongoing question when somebody's looking at it from the ideas perspective or historical perspective is, did Confucius help to create the modern family that we see in China? Or did the family structure continue the obviousness, quote unquote, of Confucian ideals? And this is a big question that's still been. All right, I've got a lag here. It's a pretty good lag between when I press my button and when the slide actually changes. So his ideas, because remember, he says he didn't create anything, he just transmitted. Morality, the individual, the state, education, politics, it all fits into this kind of filial piety dynamic. He didn't write too terribly much about religion. And there's another subject I bet you can guess pretty quickly that he didn't write a lot about, that he gets a lot of flack for. He believed that education is central to the moral civil cultivation. And I can't remember if I lifted this quote or if this was my summary. Man is evil and scholarship is salvation. I don't think he would have said that explicitly, but that's kind of a good scaffolding. You can knock off the poles of that scaffolding later, but academics have a quasi-religious characterization again, because moral cultivation, the focus. If you say, well, what is religiosity? You could say, well, where you look at the routines and the emphasis and the iconography in a culture. If you're going to say we're going to look at religiosity, it's like it's education here. Tap, wait. I was smart, I would be counting to see how long it took. All right, so this is kind of blurry to me also. This is pretty good, right? So we have a social hierarchy. We have the sovereign on the top. We have the ministers and advisors at the second. And we have the people, and these are, again, this is a hasty generalization here. And the people on the bottom. Social, and this is another argument about Confucius. Was he an egalitarian who accepted social strata, but encouraged people to move and to change if they could through education and honor? Or is he a social determinist? You stay where you are and just be good at where you are. Everybody should be a scholar philosopher, but stay where you are. So this argument suggests which end of Confucian this is saying, that the sovereign is inherently superior. He admired the Zhou, who had the mandate of heaven, who had the idea they're in that position because they're supposed to be. But it's not a kind of winner take all for the sovereign there, because Confucian would have said, you also have the moral imperative. You need to be, he used the term gentleman. Highly gendered language. Some people would say the exemplar or the paragon of virtue. That's your responsibility. Everybody else should be loyal and follow. All right. Tap.
So Joshua, if Confucianism is particularly religious, what exactly does the mandate of heaven mean?
Yeah. So I think this is one of the things that he would have accepted or just moved past. So this is my understanding of the mandate of heaven. There is a natural order to nature, to humans, and to society. This is communicated through the rulers. They are there because they are they're it's almost an a priori. They're there just like the lion is the top of the food chain. This is right. You could make arguments about manifest destiny, or about kind of medieval or late patristic hierarchy of chain of being. There are a lot of similarities. So he admired the Zhou who used that term, the Zhou used that terminology. And there are some things he just took, because one of my questions is constantly, what is your standards? How did you get your standards for the exemplary person? Because we're going to get into some contradictions or some tensions, which are very interesting. So here's how it is applied to kind of a modern organizational chart. You got the leadership. This leadership can or is not always tied to management job description. Delight the customer, focus on the fundamentals of what your business relationship is. You got to have people-based management, and you're continuously improving. And this leads you to business excellence. Wait. Here's a modern temple. Guess who's up in the pagoda up there? Statue of Confucius. You can argue who won when, from the religious perspectives. I think he would have been frustrated that so much time and energy would be devoted to ancestral worship, or to the spreading, or the money spent on building this stuff. You could, I think you could make a good argument for that, but at the end of the day, there he is. You can't see him. This is just a great pagoda.
It is something we don't have around here. We have mosques of all kinds, but do we have any pagodas?
Chinese people.
I haven't seen a lot.
No, I wondered about that.
And I don't know if maybe part of like a, if maybe it may be focused into people's houses after they immigrate
And there
somewhere.
aren't that many, I guess it's probably not true, but there's not that many Chinese, there's no Chinese culture functioning around here.
I think we don't see it as
No,
much
it's
maybe,
probably true.
but maybe it's less of the people who still practice that kind of ancestral worship. Maybe it's more about that.
Mhm.
I'm not sure.
Might be one in the city,
Mhm.
I suppose, yeah.
Chinatown.
Yeah, I mean, because these were all built by the state, whether that's the local government or broader governments too.
Oh,
Right,
Mhm.
ancestral worship is everything that the society did. So we don't have that here. So resources, including a chunk of land, and we could
Mhm.
build that. Yeah. So here are some of the big things, the 5 classics, which include the Book of Odes, the Book of Documents, the Book of Changes, Rites, and Spring and Autumn Annals. The term, the 4 books, the Doctrine of the Mean, the Great Learning, Mencius, and the Analects. And the Filial Piety as a book is traditionally attributed to him, but there's some modern skepticism about what's his and what's not.
Mhm.
Did St. Paul actually write the letter to Timothy, or was that a later St. Paul?
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
And a bunch of these are all going to be about prescriptive, deontological guidance laws governing everything from personal relationships to government structures. All right, let's go, baby. There we go. It includes a transition. It's not just a, hey, this is a good idea. We could take what happens in the household and put it in the government. No, the book deliberately shows how and why this should happen.
Mhm.
So now you're asking, what is it? You haven't had a slide up here. Like, that's a good point. The father should be in control, benevolent, and provide guidance. The mother should be obedient and cherish and govern the household. The youngest son should be mentored and follow his father and provide for his family, just like his father does, as a supplement. And the youngest son should be kind and follow his older brother and his father diligently.
Mhm.
what do we do?
Oh, yeah, all the
Oh, yeah,
time.
I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, well, everybody knows that.
Yeah.
There is a pagoda in 1700 South Wentworth Avenue
Okay,
in Chicago.
cool.
Wow.
So this
Near
is,
Chinatown.
yeah,
Mhm.
makes sense, right?
Yeah.
You build
yeah.
up a culture. Yeah.
Yeah, there is a culture.
So this is, so the tone of this sentence obviously betrays how I immediately feel about it, right? So the emperor's will is the will of heaven, impossible to question, and demands unyielding immediate obedience. But this is also a world of chaos and destruction, right? So if we're looking at Christendom in Europe, we're constantly under threat of either invasion or internal war, breaking down of resources.
What's going on in that century?
So this is a lot ways after like there of the Warring States. So the Zhou is extremely strong until like they didn't have succession. This is what I'm remembering. And then you pretty much have feudal lords that
Mhm.
again start kind of breaking up because you didn't have a strong Zhou leader to take on the succession. So ooh, I don't know if the Mongols are still a threat. So you still, so you have some negative interactions with Korea or the other, what we know as Korea. It didn't exist as such back then, but you're definitely, you have political, military nervousness. So this is one of the things he was trying to address. How do we keep a strong nation state? And that's why he kind of thought, hey, well, I should get high government positions because I've got some great ideas. Because what you've been doing doesn't feel good. So this is one of the tension points. However, in these three books, the son has an obligation to attempt correction, So to remonstrate with the father, to remonstrate with the emperor or the company leader, if they see that that person is not following the exemplary path. But he can never cross into anything that looks like rebellion or initiate a coup. So there's always a need to be dutiful and reverent. So this is the funny one. In the Analects, a son ought to cover up for a father who stole a sheep.
Wait a minute.
Uh-huh,
Yeah.
uh-huh. This is, Isn't that inherently wrong? But it's the sheep. This is the community. Well, what if it's not a sheep? What if it's supplies from the national government? And he took some because the father was acting as the point person for his village and needed some of those supplies. This would apply here too. Interesting. Yeah, so this is a picture of a book of rights. I'm a bibliophile. This resolution does not do it justice, but it's pretty much the stereotype that you think of calligraphy beauty. Detailed directions. Some of the questions that we're thinking about here is is Confucius conservative or revolutionary? Is he looking backward? Is he trying to build something forward? Does he want the old order or is he establishing something new? Is he stuffy and formal or orderly and predictable? Is he sexist or egalitarian? Does he care more about the hierarchy or individual merit? You could say yes to all of these, depending on the time, depending on the location, depending on the question. Can the duty of the family ever conflict with the duty of the state? If there's a conflict, does the family outrank or follow the state? Do all actions need to support the family and the state at the same time? So if we say, well, there's a contradiction here, therefore we cannot make that choice. We need to find something that reconciles. Is that possible? Like what? That's it's a little Hegelian, but synthesis, antithesis, or thesis, synthesis. Yeah, no, I'm not gonna go. Should an only son answer the state's call to war when his parents don't have caretakers? How does this filial piety works? Our government, so like World War I and back, if they looked at they wouldn't draft a son if that was the only.
But that the question, it seems to me.
They're missing.
Robert and Anna.
Yeah, last time they said, well, the last time they were late, and then they said they went to their grandma's house.
Oh.
Oh.
So I'm wondering if they're missing.
Oh, you sound concerned.
Yes, she does. Oh, there's Mama.
Yeah, I think it's okay.
Yeah.
Does that question imply that the family is isolated and there are no surrounding
Sure,
community
sure,
caretakers?
Sure, sure. Shouldn't filial piety surround to kind of a broader community structure, right?
Right, yeah.
Mhm. No person is entirely free to do as they wishes, no matter their status. Every person has particular moral obligations. The golden rule, which is pretty much like ours, theirs is
Yeah.
pretty much like ours. Applies to all people. Tap and lag.
Josh, we might have missed this while we were navigating the road construction.
Yep.
But David has made a big point about Hinduism being located geographically, basically to India. Is the same true with Confucianism, that is basically, and to some extent, bound to China?
When it started, yes, but it soon. So if we're gonna jump, we're gonna make that big arc for a 2,500-year arc. Japan, Korea, Vietnam, almost all of these, almost any, except for India, identity that claims some kind of Asian heritage, whether they still live there or they're in other countries. You can find examples of all types of representatives claiming some of these Confucian ideals. So this was kind of something funny. On the handout here, we've got this idea of doing something good for nothing. But this is a bigger question I had, that this is good to chew on. With all regulation and societal expectation, what happened to doing something good for its own sake? If you're concerned about saving face or about displaying respect, if your concern is the mandate of heaven, like this law, what about just good for its own sake? Where does that go?
Do you know what that is? How do you know what good for its own sake is?
Right.
I think I'm looking at motivation. Yes, that's yes. Yes. How do you know what it is? And I'm looking at motivation too, right? Just do this because I told you. That's kind of, kind of a way that you could say a lot of Christianity is structured. God said, you do.
Well, what's the motivation? Is there punishment if you don't do something good? Or are there punishments and rewards that you're dealing with? I mean, that's where you start talking about for its own sake.
This is a false premise question. Number of followers in his lifetime, 1,200, 25. Number of his followers in 1,000, 2,000. Don't know. This is not something, there's not like a census or they didn't keep records. And Confucianism sits and syncretizes anywhere you are. So this is kind of a silly question. All right, we're gonna jump some years, because this is another great contradiction or great tension. So again, these are broad strokes of communism. Full disclosure, I have some sympathy with Marxist teachings, and then I have some heavy-handed frustrations and denouncements of how it works sometimes. So communism is atheist regimes, deliberately atheist. They saw conformity and domination to an elitist ideology in Confucianism. So constantly looking back and saying that's the old way. They wanted to replace Confucius with Maoist Marxism. A little ironic. Hey, don't follow those rules, follow these rules. Why don't we want those rules? Because you are conforming and dominating, but Mao's not conforming and dominating. Yeah, going farther than eliminating caste, but as what happened in other places, and whether they were communist or capitalist, caste still seems to come up. whether it's about money or power. So they would go farther than the son giving up himself to support the parents. This, again, this is my argument because this is how I've seen the person actually dissolves into the state. So you never have a son covering up for a father. What's good is the communal uplift of the state, and the individual is of no consequence unless they are impeding the revolution. So you don't have filial piety here. It's just a straight the state, the person giving all of their efforts to the revolution and to the state.
Doesn't that suggest an opposition with the problem in our culture of everybody is an individual to such a point that you believe that not a single human ever does anything except by his own, what he's able to do for himself.
Sure, right, all the bootstraps.
Individual. Well, remember the bootstrap thing is a joke like
How do you,
Munchausen. It's not
Yeah,
Munchausen lifted himself and his horse by its
right,
hair.
yeah,
That's what bootstraps is,
It's
you know, it's
impossible.
a joke,
Mhm.
an ugly joke.
yeah.
Yeah.
It
Progressive,
seems to be, to merge the individual totally into the community and have no identity is kind of an opposite joke.
Right. Yeah. So this is a term that some academics have used. This is just as a title for a phenomenon of people using or kind of resourcing Confucianism since the middle of the 20th century. To the core commitment to individual and collective moral progress, believes that ethical insight can lead to progressive political change. So this is trying to go against saying Confucianism is stuffy and rigid. Tap and lag. Okay. Yeah, so you probably thought of some of these things here. The book on the side, as far as I understand it, is actually a reaction to another book of the opposite title. So Wu's this is kind of a historical examination from 1860 to 1950. From the German missionaries, Chinese Christians, and the globalization of Christianity. And it's not just a personal conversion, it's also a geographical or from Christ to Confucius sort of thing. Yeah, the connections with nationality and national culture. This is the concept of earlier on when we saw why some people in America who identify as Christian are looking at China and some certain elements of re-emerging Confucianism and saying, oh, maybe that's an interesting trend. A lot of it is going to have to do with what some would call a traditional family and the respect and order of hierarchy. That's my argument. His golden rule kind of popped up 500 years before Jesus, but I think most of us would argue that Jesus is just being a good rabbi when he said his golden rule. Yeah, so here's some of the challenges and problems. Yeah, you probably, where are the women? Are you ignoring women? Hey, he mentioned the word woman. Yeah, they have their place. Where did he mention it? It's demeaning. If they're around, yeah. If you keep, when they're close to you, they're nagging, and when they're far away, they're always wanting something from you. That's my paraphrase of something he actually said. It is a clear sexist hierarchy. a stable boy or field hand could sit for the boards and get into higher society.
Mhm.
That's what Confucius wanted. Yeah, you could argue that. He wanted that. Anybody with that mind and that discipline, you're going to bring honor to your family. How about this smart girl? You keep that smart girl back there. And he himself said he was backward looking. He admired the Joe
Mhm.
because of structure and strength, stability, because of clarity. You know, you kind of wanted one kind of social system. I'd have to deep dive study, and I still think I have no idea what he would think about trans rights. I think he'd go, what?
Yeah.
Maybe the education part could come in there.
Right?
Right, yeah.
Yeah.
Humans have learned a lot more about biology over the millennia.
Some people, so there's been an argument in the 20th century, whether it was from Marxist revolution perspective or before China became an economic powerhouse again later in the 20th century, that's blamed Confucianism. Confucius himself can either be the hero or the devil, and he has been in almost any situation.
Mhm.
So some people argued he was holding China or whatever nation was deeply used Confucianism as central to their ideology, holding them back in global dominance because Confucius and his followers argued this morality that almost, you don't need STEM, just do humanities. Why would you talk to me about engineering? Just be a good person and use what you already have. So that was a pretty strong argument that was used by people who said our nation is being held back, or looking into and saying, why does it look, again, early 20th century, why does it look like China's lagging behind the rest of the world in certain developments of technology? So in that case, Confucius was the devil, because throwing out all this new information about emerging technologies, or I mentioned STEM, he's like, you don't need that. You need to be a good moral person, and everything else will come.
But I don't know where exactly this fits in, but I feel like a lot of science and technology have been aimed in the direction of militarism,
Yeah.
which has served in this country to enforce the United States hegemony and global superpower. But China has been working on eradicating poverty and has made incredible progress in their economics, to the point that the United States now thinks it's a threat and wants to challenge it militarily because we don't have anything else, and it pretty much shows.
Yeah. So the opposite of my argument that I just made could be, you people are putting all the tools in front of the use.
Yeah.
Confucius could say that. Look at the people around you.
Mhm.
And some people, there are some feminist scholars, I read a couple of them, who are saying, look, we can't eschew it. He definitely looks like there's chauvinism. That is a deep problem. But if I want to say this is a cultural heritage and I like the ideas, this is what I'm going to take. So it's there's.
Yeah, Martin Luther King said something about if we put all of our resources into technology without advancing our morals, we end up with guided missiles and misguided men, and things like that.
Yep. Yeah.
But the structure of the Chinese family, irrespective of the revolution, when you were supposed to report your parents if they did something wrong, is really different from most other cultures. And the principles of filial piety and preserving the family and not letting outsiders in. And I mean, I'm thinking of it from the gangs in New York to
Sure.
the students in my studio and business, family
Yeah.
business in China, which is pretty tight. It's
Yeah.
not global corporations, it's this family is.
Mhm. I mean, there are
Promoting
stories of Asian billionaires who are constantly moving around the globe, but on Sundays, always go back home, going back home and having dinner with their parents and their children. Right? Yeah. So this is also something that I lifted. This is my summary of some parents have said that the millennial generation is more concerned with the well-being of their elders than the generation of Mao and anti-Confucianism, not being explicitly pro-Confucius. I should have said explicitly pro-Confucius. So there seems to be kind of a resurgence. There's a boom in building communities that are like for elders, and it doesn't come out of, I mean, this is what they say, it doesn't come out of let's get rid of the old people over there, but more of we need to respect our elders, and this is a good way to do it. So there's been housing resources, flag. Yeah, I'm using Google Docs in Safari, in Zoom. So this is, I'm very indebted to Schumann here. Gave some great overview. So if you're going to take away anything, read the Analects. So I think that's a lot of what he's most quoted from, and read Schumann. Yeah, I'd say this guy is just as complicated and is just as resourceful as Jesus.
So how did Confucianism spread or develop? I mean, so you say he was not very popular when he was alive, but he was known.
Yeah.
And he had a small group of disciples. Is there like a Paul to Jesus in the Confucian movement, or how did it come to grow? Just
so what I've seen, and that's still also debated, because we're in a period where there was high literacy, high written language, but it was still kind of regulated to the elites, which could either be upper class or like scholars, and it was still fairly I'm going to say conservative, but also or conservative in we want to write something that is to the service of the current regime. So as far as the spread goes, it sounds like it's more, we didn't have a Paul, but you had early house churches. So the idea is being taken and transmitted.
House churches.
Now here's the illustration idea. So if we say the early house churches, they would get together, read Psalms, talk about the remembering, and actually, worship Jesus as God.
Oh, okay.
But they didn't have these big academies or big churches yet. We're like looking in the first couple hundred years of Christianity. I think similarly with Confucius, not worshiping, like we're eschewing the divinity entirely, but talking about the ideas, talking about his filial piety, or reading the Analects and saying, look, we still have like a lot of, either corruption or cronyism, because you could level cronyism at Confucius. This is about, right? You could, but you could also use Confucius to criticize and try to reform cronyism. So you have a bunch of people who weren't like out about I love Confucius, But it just kind of started within the culture and within the society to start rippling out. So there's still arguments about how it happened because we don't have a lot of records about, now I am going to pull from this over here. But that starts happening like quietly in later writings
We're
like
still saying
after 100
BC.
years. Yes,
Yeah. Mhm.
yes.
Well, there must have been a need.
Yep.
People were looking
Sure.
for
And they were
Some-
literate?
Yeah,
guidance.
It was a highly literate society, and especially compared to Europe or other places. But there's still strata. There's still strong strata between the lower caste. So you still have like, maybe I can read basics, but not very much.
yeah, that's because that's interesting because you talk about the emphasis on education, and it makes sense. Even if the lowest strata is of followers, which is what
Mhm.
your chart said. How do you follow what you don't know?
Mhm.
So there would have to be, that would have to be a principle of Confucianism to
Hold on to,
promote
yeah.
literacy,
Mhm.
at
Mhm.
least to an extent.
And there's plenty of arguments about where the real Confucius, please stand up. You talk about motivation. Why are we trying to do this or that? And there's lots of scholars who are still saying China needs to remember Confucius. And some of them are saying because his motivation was for building a respectful, mutually respectful society.
Mhm.
You might say, well, that's not special to Confucius, right?
Well, are we talking about mutuality of respect when we're talking about that rigid hierarchy of the men, the father,
Yeah.
and the family structure?
Brilliant
Yeah.
question.
You
Yep.
know, when you said that he once said, or you were paraphrasing, but how can you serve the gods if you can't serve people? That made me think of an egalitarian and even a downward mobility kind of thing that we see with Jesus. I mean, yeah, Jesus brought that whole question forward. How can you serve God without serving
Yeah.
the people?
Mhm.
And if we think of gods as the hierarchy, the highest of the high, serving the gods might be taking from everyone else to give to the gods. And
Yep.
if the whole, how can you serve gods without serving humans? If the question is even asked, it reverses that.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
how does that fit in with the hierarchy? I was wondering how that fits in with the hierarchy, and I just came to the conclusion that it's full of contradictions and things that weren't fully
Tensions. Yeah.
intentions and
Yeah.
different interpretations.
So I think that this is where I had struggled with the concept of spirituality for years, like even defining what it was. Until it was, specifically in our tradition, and then what is my spirituality. But it was like about 10 years ago, and I can't remember what caused the spark, but it was my spirituality is how I apply these ideas in our teachings in our community to certain situations. It's like,
Mhm.
I understand that type of spirituality. Okay, that's fine. So I guess in a way, if the spirit of Confucius, that's an interesting argument, right? How do we do that? We've got these tensions. What is giving to Caesar? What is giving to God? What is the different, if you have an object, if you have a situation, how are you determining which one goes to Caesar, which one goes to God?
Well, in the case of Jesus and Caesar, Caesar was the conquering ruler
Mhm.
of the Jews who were practicing a different religion from the Romans.
Mhm.
Well, I was reading Gandhi yesterday, and
Of course you were.
I was.
I'm sorry you said.
No, I'm not
I
sorry.
was, honestly, no, because I know how that sounds, so.
No, I really think, of course you were. Yes.
No. But, like his interpretation of Caesar was interesting. It's like, give back to Caesar all his methods of violence, give back to him his methods of exploitation. Give that all back to Caesar. Like,
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
it wasn't like,
Yeah.
you owe this to Caesar. It's like, no, let Caesar have that.
Yeah, right.
and
Yeah.
Go this way instead.
So I'm gonna say goodbye to our online
Yes.
people. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for doing this. This was wonderful.
Yeah, go read. That's all I'll say.
Yeah.
Go tell me why, and then come back and tell me where I was wrong. That'll be a good conversation.
I can't see where you were wrong, but I believe you.